Now, in addition, 1 in 3 U.S. veterans of the post-9/11 military believes the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not worth fighting. And a majority think after 10 years of combat, America should be focusing less on foreign affairs and more on its own problems. Those are both according to a survey by Pew Research Center. And here in studio to talk about why all of this is Iraq vet Michael Preisner. Thanks for being here. We usually see you in LA. It's nice to have you in D.C.
Well, here occupying the Capitol with many other Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans and thousands of people from all over the country, actually.
Well, since that's why you're here and since that's what's going on this week in D.C., and it is the 10th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan with arguably no end in sight, do you think that this kind of protest will be heard by top brass and by the president?
Well, I think it will. I think they're very much hearing, especially the occupation going on at Wall Street. They're hearing us here. And, not only is this something that, will have an effect on ending the war, but really it's the only thing that will bring an end to the war. I mean, Washington has signaled quite clearly, and we've learned from the experience of, President Obama being elected in 2008, if Washington is left to its own devices, it will continue the occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan indefinitely. And they have said this very plainly. Robert Gates, General Petraeus had said that we're in this fight for the rest of our lives, the rest of our children's lives, which is quite a long time. And it is only through mass action of the people at the grassroots that can force this government to do what is in the interest of the people, and that's an immediate end to both of these wars.
What makes you think that that will be successful? Because we've seen protests, we've also seen public opinion be at very high numbers against the war, but you don't really see any change in pace, it doesn't seem.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we know that 2/3 of the American public are opposed to the war in Afghanistan. I mean, statistics also show that majority in the military no longer want to fight and die in Afghanistan and in Iraq. But history tells us that, the only progressive change, the only time change is made in the interests of that 99%, in the interests of working families and of soldiers and of others, has been through a struggle. I mean, we've seen from the workers' rights movement to the civil rights movement to the end to the Vietnam War. It's always pressure from below, making it impossible for the politicians to continue business as usual when there's any actual change made.
Let me ask you a question, because you've obviously experienced war. You're an Iraq vet. A lot of people in this country haven't. We don't have a draft, and a lot of the costs of this war haven't been felt by average Americans. Do you think it's possible for there to be the kind of movement that would affect Washington when so few actual lives in the U.S. have been affected by U.S. policies abroad with wars?
Right. Well, I would say that everyone's life, every person who works for a living, every person who's trying to have or support a family or go to the doctor and not go bankrupt because of it, or wants to not get evicted from their home, they are all affected by this war. Because whether or not you're one who experiences firsthand or has family members that go, these wars, in Iraq and Afghanistan alone, the cost is over $800 million a day of taxpayer dollars. And that's a vast squandering of resources at a time when we are in the deepest recession since the Great Depression, or worse than the worst recession ever in U.S. history. And so I think while there's growing discontent over the economy, and while people more and more are realizing that we need money for things that people actually need and deserve, like money for jobs and an education and health care and a home, while so much is being squandered on the wars, I think that's a connection that's very easy for people to make, especially since the majority oppose the wars already. They're seeing it as their conditions of living are going down, as there's continuing unemployment and joblessness, while social services continue to be slashed, while tuition continues to go up. All the while, all of this money that could be spent on things that actually meet our needs are being squandered on wars that are completely unpopular.
I think that is a connection that you are seeing being made more. You've seen that in the rise of support for Ron Paul, who's made that connection very publicly as part of his campaign, and it seems to have resonated with a growing audience that he's gotten, and that's certainly a large part of it. I'm curious, as far as veterans, this number that 1 in 3 of post-9/11 military members think that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not worth fighting. What do you think accounts for that?
Well, we even see that politicians kind of stumble over themselves explaining why we have to continue to fight in Iraq, why we have to continue to fight in Afghanistan. That's really because the wars are based on lies, and they really, if they were to say plainly, that these are wars for empire, these are wars for resources, these are wars for, Wall Street's domination over the region and for U.S. military expansion, people would not want to fight them. And so they have to mask it with these lies and deceptions. And so I would say the vast majority of people in the military today, those fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, wouldn't be able to explain, the reason that we have to do it. And then, of course, the conditions getting out or when you come home, this epidemic of suicides that we're seeing in the military, where more active duty soldiers are killing themselves and are being killed in combat. Soldiers who get out of the military come home to a 30% unemployment rate for Iraq and Afghanistan vets. That's more than double the national average. More than 11,000 Iraq and Afghanistan vets are homeless, are sleeping on the streets. There's a dropout rate from college of nearly 70% for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. And I think that the reality that soldiers are living with these constant, repeated deployments to wars that are unpopular, wars that they can't explain, and then coming home to really dismal conditions, really shows them that the U.S. government cares absolutely nothing about their lives, is reckless in throwing them away, and cares nothing about caring for these soldiers when they get home. And so I would say that there is a growing movement of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, of active duty soldiers, who are realizing very clearly that they have no reason to fight these wars. And in my experience, I'm seeing something increasingly happen where soldiers are actually resisting and refusing to fight.
What about the flip side, that military pensions are pretty good? It's one of the best pensions for public workers. And these are tough economic times, and more people have arguably re-enlisted to stay in the military, to have a job, and to have those kind of benefits. Isn't there that argument to be made that it's actually a better gig in this economy?
Many stay in the military because the prospects for jobs are so dismal when they get out. They feel that they have no other option but to stay in. But even pensions for U.S. soldiers are under attack right now, and they're considering changing the pensions to a 401k, and so those benefits are under attack as well. And even those who retire, you can serve 20 years in the U.S. military. You can go through the ranks to become a sergeant first class or a staff sergeant and retire, and your pension is so small that you still have to get another job when you get out of the military. And so I'd say, and not only that, but what you endure while you are in the military. The fact that the reality now for soldiers is not one deployment, not two deployments, not even three, but multiple combat tours that really, if you get out of them alive, if you get out of them without being horribly maimed or losing limbs, there is a severe psychological trauma that's attached to that makes you incapable of really living a normal life afterwards. And that's why we're seeing such a crisis in mental health and such a massive epidemic of suicides, is because how you come back from these tours, with the complete lack of care when you get back. And so those who try to argue that there's some economic benefit to serving in the military, all you have to do is look at the suicide numbers and see what really happens to your life when you serve.
How has it been for you? You served in Iraq.
I'm doing all right. And I think that, what I always tell people who, like I were angry about the war, was, angry about what we were a part of, feeling that we were lied to and betrayed by the U.S. government, and we're simply used as pawns in this, imperial chess game, or used as the muscle for banks and corporations. But many come back with, having a hard time dealing with what we had seen and what we had been a part of. And I would say that the best remedy for that is fighting against that government that sent us there and made us a part of what we were a part of.
And so, just quickly, because you said that you felt duped and felt like you were there under false pretenses, obviously that was Iraq, which widely people share that sentiment. Do your friends that have served in Afghanistan feel the same way about Afghanistan? And I just need a real short answer because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, it's very obvious that, as they say, we're fighting to defend ourselves against terrorist attacks in the United States. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Most of the people in Afghanistan have never even heard of the 9/11 attacks. People understand they're fighting just ordinary Afghans that just want to expel a foreign occupier, which is something that we would do if the same thing happened to our country.
It's a good point. We're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you for coming on the show. That was Michael Preisner. He's an Iraq War vet.